Hello, Sterling here. I wanted to explain what exactly this is for people who can't read the title, I guess. I don't know, most of my audience watches shorts, I can't expect much. But that's recently changed with the release of a certain video of mine, and I realized that there are probably a lot of long-form purists who don't know what I've been doing. So this is a compilation of every one of my shorts on heroes. No team-ups and no balance reviews. Just everything from this bit in the intro, and Gambit. And a couple other ones I like. I will warn you, these are my first videos, so there's a bit of a dip in quality, both in my suggested changes and the literal quality of the videos. So for a more updated viewpoint on my thoughts on each of these, I made a tier list with my chat covering the changes proposed in each video. Speaking of my chat, you like this video, right? Well, if you want to know how I made this bit, or if you have any other questions you want to ask, I'll be going live today at these times for a Q&A director's cut type of thing. Anyway, without further ado, check out this slick intro. What's the problem with Black Widow? Widow's been a bottom tier since season 0, consistently having the worst win rate across the board. One of the main reasons why is because she has significantly worse DPS when compared to other long-range hit scan characters. If you don't consider falloff, she barely even matches some supports. Okay, well if her DPS is bad, then why don't we just increase her damage a little? And now Widow one-shots half the cast. Widow has really bad damage, but if we buff her one source of long-range damage by even a tiny bit, she suddenly becomes the least fun character in the entire game. So how do we buff Widow without buffing Widow? Difficult question, I know, but the answer is quite simple. Just make it so Widow can't one-shot people. Add a rule to the Red Room rifle that prevents it from dealing more than 95% of a character's max health. That way, if we increase her damage to, say, 150, she'll be able to actually do something to tanks without terrorizing everyone else. Now, I still think she should be able to one-shot people in plasma, so why don't we bar the execute from her beloved Bucky Barnes? Look, I get it's a little bit unconventional, but in my eyes, it's the healthiest solution for both the spider and her prey. In the upcoming balance patch to Marvel Rivals, the devs nerfed Squirrel Girl's long-range harass, along with literally everything else she does. I commented on this earlier, so I figure I should probably explain what I think a better way to specifically nerf her damage at range would be. But before we can solve a problem, we have to identify it. So, what's the problem with Squirrel Girl? How about we take a look at some grenade characters from other games to see what makes Squirrel Girl so different? Just take a look for a moment and see if you can spot the difference. The arc. Most grenade characters are balanced around the fact that their grenades fall fast, limiting their range so it's a lot harder to pressure people from far away. Squirrel Girl, on the other hand, is practically shooting a rocket launcher with how straight these things fly. This is Squirrel Girl we're talking about. If she doesn't have curves, then I don't want her. On top of this, to reduce the power of rollers, or I guess bouncers, I would shift some of her Acorn's damage into direct contact damage instead of it all being in the AoE, rewarding the people who can actually hit their shots consistently, while punishing mindless spam. Lastly, Squirrel Blockade is just such a dumb ability. It's actually impossible to miss this thing with how much it bounces. To curb its ability to be spammed down chokes, I'd add a mechanic that makes it lose a portion of its stun duration with each bounce. Maybe also nerf the base stun duration a little bit too, just to be safe. What's the problem with Scarlet Witch? Wanda's always been skewed towards the metal ranks, and I think the main reason why is her skill expression, or lack thereof. Now don't get me wrong, I think it's important to have easier characters, but just because a character has a low skill floor doesn't mean they need to have a low skill ceiling. Having room between the floor and ceiling is important, both to give players a way to improve and so that the devs can target what makes a character strong at specific levels of play. And this is something I feel Wanda lacks. Other characters who are less aim intensive have some ways to express skill, whether it be through resource or cooldown management, combos and animation cancels, technical movement, or some combination of all three. They all have something, while Wanda doesn't. So the question becomes, how do we give Wanda skill expression? And honestly, there really isn't a right or wrong answer. But that's a cop-out, so I'll give it my best shot. How about we return Witch to her roots as a percent damage character, but instead of max health, we'll make it current. The intent here is to beef up her damage, but make it so that she can't really finish people off with just chaos control. Instead, she would have to use Chthonian Burst, which I would rework into a one-charge ability that gains damage based off of chaos energy gathered, sort of similar to how Doctor Strange's Maelstrom works, but as a projectile. The skill expression would come from being able to know exactly how much damage your spear would do so you can use it as early as possible to reduce your time to kill. Another pretty easy way to give Witch skill expression would be to give her more movement options for her ult, as right now it's far too easy to just hit her out of it. Maybe let her carry her momentum into the ult so that she can fling herself with Mystic Projection or something like that. These are just a couple ways to give her skill expression, and to be honest, they're probably not good ones. I'm not a Witch player, but if you are, I'd be happy to hear what you can come up with, either in the comments or live. What's the problem with Black Panther? Well, luckily for me, this time around, there's a pretty obvious answer. Black Panther has one very clear, very obvious issue. He just moves way too fast. Unless you're hitting the aim labs like it's your 9 to 5, there's almost no way you manage to hit the Panther when he's dashing around constantly. This is the main reason why I feel like the changes were largely inconsequential. It doesn't really matter how low Panther's health is when you can't hit him in the first place. So how do we go about fixing this? If any of you have ever messed around with no cooldowns in the practice range, you may have noticed something interesting about Spirit Rend. It has no startup or end lag whatsoever. You can just chain them one after another, which is a lot of the reason why he's so hard to track. I'd add a touch of end lag to force him to sit still for a moment, along with ever so slightly reducing his time to kill. Secondly, it's just way too easy for him to apply marks. Spear Toss can pretty easily hit 3 or 4 people when your enemies are grouped, which is what allows him to ping pong around for so long. To fix this, all we really need to do is reduce the radius of Spear Toss. Honestly, I feel like Panther would be in a pretty good spot here, so maybe we could even give him a tiny little buff. If anything, I would make Spinning Kick and Spear Toss share a 3 charge cooldown, as they both serve the same purpose of applying vibranium marks, so I don't feel like it would be too overpowered to let the Panther choose how he wants to do it, so long as you tone down Spin Kick to match Spear's power.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Yeah, I know. Nerfing Panther when he's already so bad? What am I, stupid? Well, yes, but this isn't about that. I think now's a good time to bring up the fact that this series started all the way back at the very tail end of Season 3.5. That means that my opinions were based off of the characters back then and not now, obviously, which leads to some of my earlier takes looking a lot worse than they really were. Anyways, back to the program. What's the problem with... Okay, I'm really trying my hardest not to be biased. I want to give every character a fair shot, whether I like them or not, but I just really hate Thor. He was a monster. If any of you played Vanguard back in the day, you know what I'm talking about. Luckily, the devs killed the character in Season 2.5 by obliterating his durability. Look, you want to fix Thor? Go back to the first grade and check your number line, because I'm pretty sure there are a couple numbers between 75 and 100. But please, if we're bringing Thor back into the meta, we need to do something about his shove. This one ability has caused me so much pain. Now on paper, his shove actually isn't that bad. With someone pinned, it only goes 6 meters uncharged. Although technically it's actually closer to 8. So what's the problem? Well, the devil's in the details. You see, Thor goes 6 meters. But whenever Thor pins someone, they're held in front of him a good few meters. So, with an uncharged shove, Thor's target will go further than he would if he didn't pin anyone. Like, what? If Thor's getting a durability buff, his pin distance needs to be cut back, especially with lower charge levels. Well, we've covered all but one of the characters whose changes I disliked. I guess it's high time I finally get to everyone's favorite vanishing strategist. What's the problem with the invisible one? Just kidding, it's Loki! Yeah, even though I did put him in the light category, I also mentioned that I would have done something different for his changes, and I'm not letting myself get away with that. So, what would I change? Well, why don't we look and see what the patch notes did first, because I actually think they addressed the correct issues. First off, clones get too much value. Flat out reducing the numbers is good enough, but I also think the issue stems from the fact that Loki can put his clones all the way in the upper atmosphere with no real downside. I'd add a mechanic that makes it so the further Loki is from his clones, the more damage they take, especially if they're outside his normal max placement range. Next, there were some nerfs towards his ult, but I think the issue here runs a bit deeper than just numbers. Fundamentally, ulting anyone other than a strategist is a really bad idea, because it essentially forces your team to run one less of the most important role for the next 12 seconds. To remedy this, I'd make it so that clones automatically fire at your teammates for the duration of the ult, which I would cut back a few more seconds. What's the problem with strategists, generally? I know all 7 of my subscribers are just dying for the Invisible Woman video, but I want to first talk about my thoughts on strategists as a whole, because I feel like there are a lot of issues that span across the entire role, and I don't want to have to go over them in each individual video, even though I probably still will. First off, there's just way too much healing, especially to yourself. I know it's usually a good idea to go for the healers first, but in Rivals it's practically a requirement considering how many characters just straight up can't outdamage some strategist healing, both to others and to themselves. Take a moment to consider that a Luna Snow hitting all her shots, big ask, I know, will give only 9 less healing per second to her Snowflake target than a Pocket Mercy. Luckily, this could be pretty easily fixed by just reducing all healing across the board, although the personal healing is probably going to be more of a case-by-case basis. Just like the next problem, ultimates. It's bad enough that almost every strategist ult does the same thing, but that thing also just so happens to be mind-numbingly boring to play against. It also makes characters that are capable of killing through these support ults way stronger, and puts an insane amount of pressure on them to actually hit the one-shot. Like I said, it's gonna be different for each character, but the main goal is to make strategist ults more unique and hopefully not all extremely expensive. Okay, for real this time. What's the problem with the Invisible Woman? Sue is kind of a weird case in my eyes. She seems to be designed to be utility focused, sort of like how Adam is damage focused, but she has the healing output of a standard support, like Luna or Dagger. I actually really like this part of her identity. It almost makes her feel like a tank support hybrid, where it's a tank's abilities on a support body. So I would lean into this a bit more to help her feel more unique. First off, I'd reduce her healing output to be a bit closer to the other less healing focused strategists, while beefing up her shield. While we're talking about it, did anyone else not know that this thing is basically a dagger bubble? I feel like it's extremely unclear that it continuously heals people around it, so I'd add some sort of visual for the healing. I think you could just make it an actual bubble shield, like the thing that she's known for doing, but it might be a bit too much. Second, I really feel like she should have Earthbound somewhere in her kit. I know the devs have been a bit trigger happy when it comes to giving it to characters, but of all people, I feel like Sue deserves it. The real problem is figuring out where to put it, as I feel like there's a fair case to be made for all of her abilities. Guardian Shield and Invisible Boundary already slow you when you pass through them, so I feel like it could make sense for it to also stop dashes. Force Physics' knockback can be completely negated by dashing at the right time, so a second of Earthbound could help to make it more useful against mobile heroes. And Psionic Vortex just kinda sucks. Take your pick. Lastly, to help diversify ultimates, how about we change Invisible Boundary into something a bit more thematically in line? It's kind of insane how the woman famous for making shields doesn't have any way to give shields in her base kit. So why don't we change her ult to give allies who enter it a one-off burst of overhealth that decays over time when you're not in the ult. Still defensive, but more interactive than constant healing. You know those little stat buffs you get to reward you for playing the anchor of a team up? Even though they're permanently active and get bounced around when they're changed, so they essentially do nothing? Those ones. I've been scratching my head for the better part of a month over the point of their existence, but I couldn't figure it out until I was working on the General Strategist video. When I was trying to figure out how much healing per second certain abilities had, I did the math and found that Luna Snowflake heals 39 health a second, but when I tested it in game, the number was different. Eventually, I realized that the official Marvel Rivals website doesn't include Luna Snow's 15% healing buff she gets from Chilling Assault, but even accounting for that, the numbers still didn't add up. I was getting 44 from my math, but in game, I tested it to be 51. That's a 15% difference. Wait. Yep, that's right. Luna Snow's seasonal bonus is applied twice to her Snowflake. Once when you initially heal someone, and again when that healing is transferred to your ally. Man, I love it when bugs create cool, unintended features in video games. What's that? There's footage of Mr. Fantastic's fists completely phasing through the enemy on screen right now? What's that doing there? Okay, it's 3 a.m. when I'm recording this. Apparently, they actually fixed the hit registrations the day after I recorded the audio. I'm still pissed about the Snowflake, but thank you. Anyways, to fix Luna Snow not being the definitive #1 support anymore, I would buff her seasonal bonus to 10,000% so she can really take advantage of this happy little accident. I'd also have her personally execute Reed Richards in lore to take his place in the Fantastic Four, as she's way more popular and cool and awesome and funny. And what's the problem with Luna Snow? Luna's a bit of a polarizing character. Either you love her or you hate her, and I have my opinions. Personally, I think the main issue is that she's a bit too good for an all-rounder. She has good healing at any range, she's pretty mobile, can heal groups effectively, has good sustain and anti-dive capabilities, along with one of the strongest ults in the game. And the only real caveat is that you have to have mildly good aim to play her. I think there's one of two ways to handle Luna. Either you lessen her capabilities overall and make her a jack-of-all-trades, master of none, or you give her some sort of weakness. I'm gonna go with the latter just because it's a bit more interesting. So why don't we start with her ultimate? And honestly, I wouldn't change much. While it's bad to have every ult be a huge amount of healing, I think that one or two are perfectly acceptable. And of all strategist ults, I think Luna's would be the hardest to rework without completely changing the ability. I would strip away some of the excess bells and whistles though. The issue with her ult in my eyes is that she can play really close to her teammates, so it's possible for her to ult on reaction and save them. If she was forced to play far away, however, then she would have to take time to walk forwards, potentially putting her and her team in danger while she approaches. First off, we need to find a way to discourage playing close to your team as Luna. Reducing her durability by nerfing her base health and Cryo Heart is a fine way to do it, but I think a more interesting way to do it could be to reduce her base healing a lot but make it ramp up the further away you are from your target. Now, even if she's far away from her team, she can still pretty easily skate up to them, so we'd also have to change smooth skate. Along with a slight nerf to her top speed, I think making it so that she accelerates over a second or two instead of immediately going full throttle could be a good way to nerf her close range mobility without messing with her rollouts. What's the problem with Rocket Raccoon Season 2? It's the Season 2 balance changes. I genuinely think that this is the worst set of changes ever made to a character. Fight me, Jeff Mains. I have no idea why the Rivals team decided to go through with them. Probably the most excusable change is the one made to repair mode. I guess it's fine to let Rocket have more burst healing, but I feel like it makes it so Rocket's much more encouraged to constantly use repair mode instead of swapping between the two. I'd shift more power into the healing over time, and also make it so Rocket benefits from alternating between the two modes. Maybe make hitting with one mode slightly refill ammo for the other. The real crime of Season 2 is what they did to his mobility. Look how they massacred it. Rocket's movement was the most interesting part of his kit, and I get that he was hard to kill, but why nerf the part that took actual skill and felt cool to pull off instead of Rocket's ability to constantly heal himself by holding M2? I'd reduce his self-healing along with making it so his balls can't heal himself until they bounce once. And for the love of God, please give Rocket his legs back. He needs them. Lastly, we get to his ult, and this is just the most boring change they could have possibly made. Rocket's ult wasn't as good as some other strategist ults, but that's not a bad thing. Characters can have weaknesses. Just revert it. What's the problem with Cloak and Dagger? Now, I wasn't in the room when they were designing Cloak and Dagger, but I've got a pretty good idea of how the character is supposed to work. Dagger can output a lot of healing, but she's very frail, so at any sign of danger, she has to switch to Cloak, who has a lot of utility but is completely unable to heal. Therefore, the skill expression of Cloak and Dagger is balancing maximizing your time spent on Dagger without dying. With that established, can someone explain to me why Dagger has one of the strongest self-preservation options in the entire game? Dagger Storm is the single dumbest ability in the game. Not just because it's impossible to mess up, unlike other anti-dive options, not just because it makes it so that some characters just can't kill her with 50% uptime, but because it goes against the entire design of the character. Remove its ability to heal Dagger and move the self-healing to Cloak. And just like last time, we gotta make the ult something other than an area where you don't die. I would cut the damage down a lot, then make it so that allies in the ultimate get a healing boost while enemies get a damage vulnerability, matching what their walls do. This should hopefully make it feel more like both Tandy and Ty are contributing equally, instead of it just being the former. What's the problem with Adam Warlock? What is the problem with Adam Warlock? To be honest, I really can't think of anything. I know I'm usually really good at complaining, but Adam's kit is just really solid. Sure, you could argue back and forth over 5 damage for eternity, but I don't think there are any really big issues with the character. So why don't we get a bit nitpicky? Cosmic Cluster. Why is this an ability? It has no cooldown, uses ammo, hell, it's even bound to a mouse button by default. Other secondary fires like it are attacks, so why is this one different? I think you should be able to move slightly when respawning with his passive and ult. Nothing major, just let people move at like 2 meters a second during the animation. Maybe slow fall could be nice to let you respawn high up and then descend down like an angel or something. I'll be honest, I'm really looking for anything to talk about, but there just isn't much. Good job, Guang Guang. Here's a sticker. I guess if you can think of anything, I'd be happy to hear it. What's the problem with Mantis? Mantis is a really hard character to balance across different ranks, mostly because of how much value she gets from headshots. Not only does it double your damage like any other headshot, but it also increases your healing flower regen by up to more than 8 times. Normally, I'm all for skill expression, but that is just absurd. There's a reason she's barely played in metal ranks and pick ban in pro play. I think the best way to tone this back is to buff her natural regeneration of life orbs while making it so critical hits only restore part of a life orb. I would also nerf her projectile speed attack to make it harder to land crits from a distance, forcing her to play aggressive if she really wants to get as much value as possible. Next, this one might just be me, but isn't it insane how Mantis can give people 16 seconds of damage boost if she double stacks it? That's more than enough time for any dive character to get in, do their thing, and get out. I'd tone down the cap a good few seconds, or maybe just outright remove her ability to double stack. Lastly, we've got another circle of healing. If we're gonna change it, I think Soul Resurgence could work nicely as a sort of rallying cry to fit in with Mantis' theme of buffing your allies. So how about we drop the healing and increase the overhealth conversion rate and cap? That way, it'd be used as a pre-fight juice-up instead of a defensive ult. What's the problem with Jeff the Landshark? Jeff's been making the rounds recently because people finally looked past his lack of a healing ult and saw the raw numbers in his kit. Immediately, I would cut back his base damage, increase his maximum fall-off, and then give him healing fall-off. Half because I think his ability to support dive makes him feel really oppressive, and half because seeing Jeff players do this bothers me. Next, healing bubbles have just had a really hard time finding their place. They used to be instant healing until people realized you could pour them directly into your allies, so they had to get nerfed pretty hard. I think the real issue with them is that there's not much of a reason to set them up beforehand when you could just pump them straight into your allies. So I would make the bubbles mature over 4 seconds once they've hit the ground, slowly converting the health over time to instant healing. For example, if you picked up a bubble after 2 seconds, you would get 60 health instantly along with 60 healing over 2 seconds, and after 4 seconds, it would just be 120 health instantly. Separate from those bubble changes, I think a speed boost is a bit too strong for how long it lasts, so I would make it a shorter but stronger decaying burst. Now, contrary to my beliefs on circles of healing, I really liked the recent changes to his ult. Conceptually, making it so that there's a source of healing to rely on while Jeff is on his adventure is a good idea. The only issue is that they made it way too strong. I would increase the radius and duration of the puddle, but pretty heavily reduce its healing. To compensate, I'd increase Swallow's capabilities when swallowing allies, giving it an instant burst of healing to Eaten friends while also letting them leave whenever they want, so that the 3-year-old playing the funny shark on his dad's MacBook Air can't take you off the cliff with him.
Marvel Rivals needs to stop doing this. It's gonna kill the game. In the recent balance changes, we've seen 2 new sources of anti-heal pop up in the wake of the dominance of triple support, which is very bad. Now you might be thinking, anti-heal counters triple support, that solves the issue, right? But it's not that simple. Giving characters specific tools to deal with overpowered strategies creates a ton of problems. First and foremost being that you can't run every single one of these characters at once. Adding anti-heal to characters instead of just nerfing strategists to be less powerful makes it so that only those characters can do anything against triple support. So you have to swap to those characters to counter the strategy, which is miserable. We cannot afford to have a repeat of the Overwatch 2 tank experience. And that's even if you can counter swap, because it's very possible that the enemy just bans out the characters that have the ability to counter whatever they're doing, leaving you helpless. Also, this is Marvel Rivals. The main selling point of the game is that you can play all these cool heroes, which is just completely thrown out the window with this approach to balance. I know it's a lot easier to just add anti-heal and call it a day, but these problems need to be faced head on. This isn't just about triple support either. Giving characters Earthbound to counter a dive or flyer meta are not actual solutions. It's fine to have characters with these mechanics. Having cool and diverse abilities is part of what makes Rivals so fun, but adding them in specifically to counter an oppressive meta instead of just fixing the problem will never work in the long run. If you want an example of a game that's been doing this for years, look at Dead by Daylight. Trust me, if you as a game developer are ever doing anything similar to behavior, you are doing something very, very wrong. What's the problem with dive? Individual dive heroes have a lot of problems on their own, but the one common thread linking them together is interactivity. More specifically, their complete lack of it. Most dive encounters boil down to them doing their thing, and if it works, you die. If it fails, you don't. This, unsurprisingly, is not very fun to play against. So my main goal would be to give them each some way for your opponent to interact. Now, it's already frustrating enough to have to deal with dive, so imagine how much worse it is when you don't even get to see it coming. Now you might be saying to your phone, statistically, this is just a skill issue. You should have been looking around or reacted, but I disagree. Not everyone has the knowledge or mental bandwidth to track respawn timers, rollout times, and flank routes, especially more casual players. This leads to dive getting nerf after nerf because players don't have the game sense to deal with it. But what if they did? If you've ever played against one of these 6 characters, you've probably heard something like this.
Get down, sniper!
Punisher's a turret!
What are these weird keyhole things anyway?
That's right. In their infinite wisdom, the devs of Marvel Rivals implemented a system where your character might warn you about hazards that might not stand out, like onks, squids, and snipers. Or snipers. I think they should add one of these for divers that triggers when they enter your line of sight while you aren't looking at them. That way you can immediately know to be on guard when one is near. It's not enough information to know exactly where they are, but it's just enough to give you a chance to react and interact. What's the problem with Ultron? Ultron is an incredibly hard character to balance. Currently, his kit sits on a knife's edge, too strong with triple support and too weak without, because in trying to make a selfish strategist, the devs essentially just made a duelist that can heal. That's not a selfish strategist, that's just selfish. Then again, you can't really make him a heal bot. Bot. I mean, this is Ultron we're talking about. He's still a villain, and thematically, he's really not that into life. I don't like to just outright rework characters. Content-wise, I think it's kind of a cop-out, but I can't think of any way to make Ultron work without one. So, how do we make Ultron both selfish and a team player? Well, luckily for me, this problem's already been solved in a different game. I present to you Renata Glask, the perfect example of what I think Ultron should feel like. For those who don't know, she's basically just Silco from Arcane, a manipulator who doesn't support out of the kindness of her heart, but because she stands to gain something
something in return. This is exactly what Ultron should feel like, manipulating his team into doing what he wants with his supportive abilities, essentially turning him into a literal strategist. To start, I'm just gonna blatantly lift Renata's passive by making it so that Encephalo-Ray applies a mark that reveals enemies through walls and detonates when allies do damage to the target. I think shifting Ultron's damage into a more teamwork-oriented form is a good way to keep his damage high while still being reliant on his team, like all strategists should be. This also lets him mark targets for his team to prioritize, playing into that commander play style. Next, we need to give him some form of better healing if we want him to be a functional second support. I would add functionality to Patch by making it so that when you use the ability without a target, it does a burst of healing around the drum. Doing this frees up Firewall, so I would rework it to be a way to encourage your allies to go in by making it so that you gain shields over time when standing near enemies, forcing allies to play aggressive with the shield if they want value. Moving on, Dynamic Flight is a bit too strong in my opinion. Ultron can already fly, so I don't think he needs that strong of a defensive option. I would reduce the dash distance and remove the personal health. Look, I know this is a lot, well beyond the scope of my usual videos, and I'm fully expecting to get comments from Ultron mains who don't like it at first. Big changes have historically never gone well, but I don't think that means that they can never work. Just let this one sit in your mind for a bit. What's the problem with Magneto? Magneto's actually really solid all around. He's got good tools to help his team, pretty strong damage, a solid ult, and oh my god, he is so boring. I can't stand having to play this old man. Every game, it's the same thing. Shield the cooldowns, bubble the diver, bubble yourself when no one picks a second tank. Seriously, you get like 4 seconds of fun when you ult, and half the time it's blocked by the enemy Magneto, who's also not having fun, by the way. It's a vicious cycle of misery, made even worse by the fact that Magneto's been a really solid pick since the beta. To try and make Mag more entertaining without making him any better than he already is, I would decrease the damage on the spell field of his primary fire and slightly increase the projectile damage, along with adding a nice sound effect whenever you hit a direct. A clean to really make it feel meaty when you hit dead on. This is a nerf to his DPS overall, so to compensate, I'd increase the damage of his melee, allowing him to still have the same power up close. Also, hitting people with a big sword is fun. Mag Cannon does this weird thing where you kind of just stop moving once you've reached the end of its knockback, making it feel really weak. So I would make the knockback velocity scale down over time instead to give it some kick. Lastly, I would increase both the drain and refill speed of Metallic Curtain, while also slightly decreasing the cooldown, letting him use it more often in shorter bursts.
So, what do you think so far? Any thoughts on that last video in particular? Well, I can say that the YouTube algorithm definitely had some thoughts. Back in the day, I used to get 1,000 or so views per video. Maybe 2,000 if I did really good. But the Magneto video on release barely even made it to 100. I remember feeling sick to my stomach. Like the past 2 weeks I committed to daily uploads were all for nothing. And like my dream was doomed to fail. But I'm sure you're all aware that that isn't what happened. My views recovered, more than recovered. They increased tenfold, and just a few days later, I had actual people interacting with my content. For the first time, I had real tangible validation that what I was making was good. So I guess the moral of the story is that to get to the light at the end of the tunnel, you gotta go through the darkest part first. And, you know, make sure your microphone is pointed the right way so you don't blast people's right ear off. Rookie mistake. What's the problem with Doctor Strange? Just like with Adam, I think Strange is really well put together, and with the exception of some minor number adjustments, there aren't any changes I think he needs, but there is one aspect of his kit that confuses me. Crisis of Magic is a really weird passive. If you don't know, and I wouldn't blame you for it, when Doctor Strange stays at 100 dark magic for too long, he gets cursed with anti-heal. Sounds pretty dangerous, especially for a tank, but the issue is that it's basically impossible for you to ever get hit with the heal cut. First, you can clear out the darkness really easily with Maelstrom Madness, especially now that it has a 6-second cooldown, but even if you do hit 100, it still takes 3 entire seconds to activate. That would mean that you would have to generate 100 dark magic in less than 3 seconds for you to be guaranteed to overflow, and after all that, you get hit by 2 seconds of anti-heal. Overall, it just doesn't really do anything as a punishment, so I think it could be cool as a risk-reward trade-off instead. Maybe make it so that you gain a damage boost while affected by the anti-heal, but you can't hold up your shield, so you're actually at risk of dying. I also think that Strange, along with every other meter-based character, should have some kind of indicator to display when your stacks will start to fall off. Something like this, mayhaps? What's the problem with Emma Frost? Emma is oppressive. It's no secret that she can bully other tanks to a concerning degree with her diamond form, especially when she combos it with her psychic spear. The high damage of her melee attacks lets you burst down the sentience way faster than I think is fair for how much damage it does, so I would make activating diamond form immediately shatter any sentiences, dealing max health damage scaling based on the remaining health of the crystal, hopefully limiting her ability to 100 to 0 times. Beyond the combos, Emma can last a really long time in fights, which steps on the thing's toes a bit, being a CC resistant tank with high endurance. I think the best way to deal with this is to give Emma some
some vulnerability when she comes out of diamond form by having her lose all of her built-up energy upon activation, making it much more of a commitment to use. I think you could get cute with it and have her convert the energy into an overshield, but stacking that on top of damage resistance could get a bit messy.
What's the problem with the Thing? Ben's been in a pretty tough spot since Emma came out, as she's both a counter pick and a better pick unless you really can't deal with a Panther. I think nerfing her will do a lot to let Grim shine, but it won't get him all the way there on its own. One of the main issues with the Thing is that he needs a lot of healing to work, and in the process he feeds a ton of ult charge to the enemy team. I think the best way to solve both of these problems is to reduce his base health and increase the bonus health gained with each stone haymaker, as bonus health doesn't give ult charge. I also think Ben can feel a bit clunky when jumping to allies because you end up behind them, which isn't really where you want to be as a melee Vanguard. I would make it so holding down the button for embattled leap lets you jump through them instead. Also, where's Battle Blitz? It's not on the website. Did they forget they gave him an ability? What's the problem with the Hulk? Bit of a warm take from me, probably a nice medium rare, but I think the Hulk is the strongest tank in the entire game if you really master it. The only thing holding him back is the fact that for most of his life he's been getting banned in half of all games because of the Gambit team, so no one really wanted to invest the time to learn him. Seriously, Hulk has some wild tech, and at the highest level he is terrifying. But first, I want to talk about some quality of life. Banner should be able to respawn as Hero Hulk. It's dumb that you need to waste time hulking off in the spawn room. I know the Bruce mains would be sad if it just forced you into hero mode, so I guess I can make it so holding down Q while respawning lets you come back as Bruce or something. Anyways, on to the actual issue. Hulk can just stun lock you in monster mode if he's good enough with his combos, as the knockback on monster form heavy blows sends you into the air before you're done being stunned from the incredible leap, letting him chain them together. You could fix this by making it so knockback cancels any knockdown based stuns, but honestly being forced down to the ground is punishment enough for getting hit by the grab, so I would reduce the length of the knockdown effect once Hulk lands instead to give you a better chance at fighting back. Now, looking at lower levels of play, monster form isn't that great. Outside of situations where you really need to force one person specifically to not play for a few seconds, it's mostly just used to stall, so I think it needs some kind of buff that can't be abused by the Maestro. I would increase monster form's damage while slightly decreasing its duration. It's a bit scary, but increasing the damage of Gamma Burst to be able to two-shot 275 health characters seems fair enough in my eyes. What's the problem with Captain America? Cap is a bit of an oddball. He's got a lot of very unorthodox mechanics, so I'd like to take some time to iron out some of his kinks. First off, does he really need to do all that just to output semi-viable damage? I think the animation cancel is fine to let him effectively sprint and punch at the same time, but I would bump up his normal DPS to match it so you don't have to do it all the time. Next, I think his ability to hop around on point is frankly kind of annoying, so I would add a slight cooldown once you land or some startup to his jump to force him to spend a bit more time on the ground. But to compensate for the nerf to his ability to stall, I'd buff his shield health and make it so that he can actually aim when he deflects, shifting his survivability a bit more into bulk over speed. Lastly, for being an ability that's supposed to lead your team into battle, following behind Freedom Charge is kind of hard due to how narrow it is, or like a Freedom conga line if anything. I would increase the width and duration, but make it so the shield gain decreases the further back on the path you are, so you actually have to follow him into battle to keep the effect at full strength. Also, thank you for 100 subscribers. I think now's a good time to introduce you to the namesake of the channel. Say hello to Sterling. What's the problem with Penny Parker? Penny's had a concerningly high win rate for most of the game's lifespan, but I don't think her numbers are the issue. The real problem is that no one understands what she does, letting her get away with way more than she should. I don't blame them, to be honest. Her ability descriptions leave a lot to be desired. Seriously, why is Cyberweb not just its own passive? They explain it like 3 separate times. But I think the best way to balance her is to make it a bit more obvious what you need to do. For allies, I would make it so standing on Cyberwebs gives a tiny amount of overhealth to placebo your supports into standing next to the nest. And for enemies, I would add a more satisfying sound when you hit the nest to know shooting it is a good thing. Now, if my nest is getting shot at, I need to know. To play Penny at the highest level, you really have to be able to micromanage your nest, but it's pretty hard to do that in the heat of the moment when my nest's health is all the way over here. I would either play a sound whenever it gets damaged or add a setting that lets you move the nest's health to right below your crosshair so you know exactly what's happening to it without having to take your eyes off the fight. Moving on to actual balance, I don't think Penny should be able to headshot. To me, Penny is a character where you win by anticipating what your enemy is going to do and setting up beforehand to have the advantage, not by having better aim than them, so I don't see why she should have to worry about hitting headshots. I would remove her ability to headshot, but give her direct hits a slight compensation buff. A lot of people think Penny's ult is bad, but I disagree. It's basically the best space taking ability in the game, which is exactly what a tank needs, and if you ever drones built up beforehand, it packs quite a punch. Keyword it. It's the same problem Release Fantastic had with his ult, where you had to build up big mode beforehand to be able to actually do anything with it. So I would employ a similar solution by making it so during Spider Sweeper's startup animation, your nest rapidly deploys drones to immediately get you up to the cap. What's the problem with Groot?
I feel like Groot has been low-key a really strong pick for basically the entire game's life. Sure, he gets countered especially hard by anti-tank tools, but outside of that, he's kind of nuts. First, Groot has a lot of kill power at range, more than I think he should. I would add a small bit of damage fall off to his primary to make it so he can't do quite as much damage from afar without a grasp wall. Next, Groot's ult is way too fast. For having the very real possibility of being a team wipe, it's a bit crazy that he can get it off quicker than he can say I am Groot. Literally, it connects before the voice line is done. You could argue that you could just support ult, but if you watch my video on the Strategist cast, which, if you haven't, I don't blame you, they were made before most of you were subscribed. Long story short, I want to nerf support ults, which also means toning down the ults that get especially countered by big circles of Hela. And in my opinion, Groot ult is at the top of that list. I think the best solution is to increase the windup a good bit, along with a slight reduction in projectile speed. Lastly, I think if we're pruning Groot's unnecessary strength, it's only fair if we give him a little help with his weaknesses as well. I would make it so having a wall activated gives you a small amount of damage resist, while reducing his base health to keep his effective health about the same. If you don't get the math, this basically just means that Groot takes reduced percent damage while having the same health against normal damage. What's the problem with Angela? Angela's a really interesting case. Every component in her kit fits together nicely except for one. In any kit, the ability to freely fly is already a pretty huge investment, but when you add on a kidnap ability, you kind of hit the limit of your power budget. The tackle is just too strong. Its presence in her kit makes it the only thing she's allowed to do, preventing her from having any space taking her team assisting capabilities. I think from the perspective of purely focusing on the game's health, the best thing to do would be to remove it. But I also recognize that a lot of people have gotten attached to it, so I think a good potential solution could be to actually focus her kit around the charge. I would essentially swap the charge bars for Assassin's Charge and Spear Bikers. Bikers? Why is it plural? Whatever. I think if her entire kit has to revolve around the pin, it should be the big payoff you work towards with your other abilities, not the little boot. It also actually forces you to play the game to work for your charge instead of just sitting up in the skybox waiting for your energy to come back. Now, naturally, there would have to be a lot of changes made to her energy here. You couldn't literally just one-to-one swap them. I don't think I could give good exact numbers as to what I'm thinking, but the spark notes of what I would do is pretty heavily reduce the charge gain from Seraphic Sword and increase your charge gain from shielded stance, along with maybe adding a way to gain charge from the shield granted to your allies by Divine Judgment. This is in an effort to promote actually helping your team instead of just flying in circles. You know what they say, after all, the best way to encourage teamwork is selfish rewards, and what's more selfish than shoving someone off a cliff? What's the problem with Venom? No, there's something that needs to be said. I get a lot of comments from people saying, oh, why are you changing so-and-so? They're so balanced. And first off, it's a series. It would be weird if I didn't cover every character. But second, balance is not the only thing about a character that can be problematic. Sometimes there's problems with the design itself. The two most common design problems Rivals has are over-reliance on a single ability and uninteractivity. These both create really feast or famine characters, where you either stomp them because they don't have what counters you, or you can't play the game because they do. These characters have really oppressive tools, so they need to be kept intentionally weak for them to be balanced. This leads to frustration on both ends. They feel weak from your perspective, but strong from the enemy. Some of these characters are outliers balance-wise, but a lot of them are doing pretty fine in the meta. Despite this, I would still argue that they have problems. Again, not everything is about balance. If I get one more comment about how you shouldn't change a character because they're a mid-tier, I'm gonna lose it. And thanks for 500 subscribers. If we can get 2,500 by my 21st birthday, I'll drink for the first time live on stream. God knows I need it. What's the problem with Venom? First off, sorry to all Venom maniacs, I should have never baited you. I actually really like Venom. He's just so neutral, in a good way. I feel like most of the time against an average Venom, he'll go in, not get any picks, pop resilience, then leave unscathed. Value's still gotten, disruption and ult charge matter, but it's usually pretty even. Now, good Venoms can do a lot if they hit headshots, especially with another diver, and coordinated teams can time their CC to kill him before he can shield, but it's never really all that unfair on either side. I really like that. The smaller, more consistent value from a dive character feels oddly stable, especially in such a volatile game. I think if I were to change him, I'd give him more tools to set up his team for success. Frenzied Arrival was already changed to pull enemies in, so I think I'd lean into that identity more by making it so the slow and cellular corrosion scales based on how far you are from Venom, making it harder to leave and less punishing to stay close to encourage people to group up. Now, I do think Venom's ult is a little strong. A potential one-shot, second health bar, solid movement, and now anti-heal all for the low price of 2,500 energy is maybe a bit much. So I think some part of that needs to take a hit. If I had to choose, the one-shot would probably make the most sense to remove, as it's basically just counting to 3 when you really boil it down to its core, and at least like a third of Vanguard players can do that. It is kind of a cool combo though, and if it were to be removed, you'd need some kind of compensation. Maybe you could add the inwards knockback of his slam to further push his identity of grouping enemies up. Alright, let's do this one last time. What's the problem with Spider-Man? I gotta say, purely immersion-wise, Spider-Man's the best character in the game, right? No one else makes you feel more like the character you're playing as. Swinging around at Mach 3, it's just so satisfying. This speed does cause some problems though. Because he can move faster than every other diver, it lets him force engagements way more than anyone else, forcing him to be weaker in fights to compensate. They've tried to do that by reducing his numbers, but I think it's made him pretty useless in a lot of cases, so I think instead there should be an effort made to give the victim more stuff to do. Take for example, Get Over Here. It's kind of an issue I have with all stunts, but why can't you look around during them? It's annoying on most abilities, but it's at its worst with the pole because it forces you to flick over to Parker to be able to do anything. If you can't just let people move their cameras during stunts for some reason, at least make it a route instead, just so that people have more time to react. Also, while we're on the topic, this is dumb. I don't care if it's hard to do. I don't care if it's cool. If I'm standing in the middle of the map, I should not be able to be pulled off. I'd make it so after you've been pulled a certain distance past the max range, the line breaks, but you keep your momentum. Now this is all fine and dandy, but Spider-Man doesn't pull people into combo then all that much. He does, however, use amazing combo in almost all of his one-shots. I'd make it so both the spider and his prey get a boost in the direction they're currently moving when hit, essentially functioning as a rudimentary form of DI, forcing Spider-Man to read his opponent's movements for easier one-shots. I think after all this, we can finally return Spider-Man's damage back to its former glory, which should hopefully let him retain some resources in case he missed the combo, now that it's less guaranteed. Also, wow, we got 1,000 fast. It's been like 2 videos since we were at half that. It's crazy, man. What's the problem with the Human Torch? Johnny's been having it rough lately. Deserved, to be fair, he was a villain in his prime, but I don't think the nerfs really solved what was wrong with him, so why don't we start over and try something else instead? Torch has a lot of really obnoxious tech, none more infamous than his melee cancel. The way this works is that Fire Cluster only starts to regenerate once the end animation is over, but you can cancel that end lag with abilities to make it come back faster. The issue is that one of the abilities he can cancel with is his melee, letting him spam clusters without using any cooldowns. Pretty easy fix here, just make it so using the melee to cancel your cluster doesn't cancel the charge cooldown. Although I think Torch's reliance on the tech shows that his natural regeneration could stand to be a little bit quicker. One of his other more prolific techs was his weird animation jig, which he would stack with Plasma Body to become really hard to hit. Smoothing out his animations is probably a good idea, but that's weird and outside my realm of understanding. So I think the best fix I can suggest here is to make Plasma Body accelerate to full speed over a second, so it's a bit less effective when used between abilities. Now that his tech's all sorted out, I think Fire Cluster is a bit too good at range, or was, I guess, so I would slightly extend his fall-off. In my opinion, all well-designed flyers should have something tying them to the ground, like how Iron Man's got his limited range Unibeam, and Angela's got her general meleeness. I think it's wise to target Cluster's long-range poke power specifically instead of nerfing it overall, letting it retain the same strength up close. No, but actually, the real problem is these sunglasses. Look at what could have been, man. Such a shame. What's the problem with Blade? Blade's been weak for basically his entire life, but I think that's a very good thing. Trust me, we do not want a Blade meta. If he is ever good, he'll be the most oppressive character in the entire game. Blade's already an advantage pusher, so any inch that we give him will let him take miles. Because of that, I don't think we can touch his numbers, especially not these two, as it's way too risky to potentially give him that inch. Instead, I think a good way to buff Blade safely is to give him more options. Take for example, Scarlet Shroud. Currently, there's no reason to ever use this while awakened. It just causes you to take reduced healing with no benefit. So I think it could be interesting if there was an upside to blocking in Bloodline. Maybe reduce the damage you need to take to get another dash charge back, or have it also grant some stacks based on how much damage you take. It doesn't really matter what it is, so long as it actually adds a reason to stay vamped up while blocking. Another thing that could be nice is a little help when it comes to situations where you have to switch to your gun for a second while awakened. I'd make it so hitting the first bullet shot after switching during awakening causes stack decay for a moment so that you aren't as punished for quick follow-ups, but you can't just shoot people forever and hold your stacks. Ideally, this would help him keep his momentum going, which should be a lot of fun. What's the problem with Hela? I think Hela's a really good example of the issue I have with a lot of poke characters. Let's talk about the duelist matchup triangle. Poke beats brawl, brawl beats dive, dive beats poke. Now there are some characters who invert this, but it's usually at a pretty big cost. So I ask you, what does Hela pay to have such a strong get out of dive free card? Astral Flock is way too strong of an escape option for Hela to have. Invincibility, bonus health, and being really damn hard to track. Seriously, who thought a tiny black crow in a game with this was a good idea? Fundamentally, Hela's kit is too good to fit Flock, and while you could just micro nerf the stats until it's non-functional, I think I would instead rework the ability to make it so when you send out the crow, you stay where you are. Then you can reactivate the ability Zed style to teleport to the crow. Or maybe Yoru is a better comparison. Who cares? You get the point. I think this adds a lot more thinking to an admittedly pretty skin-deep character, making you more vulnerable to getting dove if you don't set up beforehand, but adding in mind games and a trade-off between distance and wait time. What's the problem with Peter Quill? Now, I know I just went over how you shouldn't give poke characters movement, but I think there's one situation where it's a-okay, and that's mid-range. When you're most effective at a range barely longer than your opponent's arm, you're innately always going to be in a lot of danger, so you really need those kiting tools to function. Honestly, I think Star-Lord's design is amazing, right up until here, where you abandon all mid-range qualities to sit in a corner and lock onto a strange shield. I kind of hate Star-Lord's ult. Not from a balance perspective, like I said, strange shield, but it just goes against the whole mid-range vibe we've got going on. So I think a good way to encourage Star-Lord players to stay right in that effective range is to decrease the base damage of the ult, but make it so within 10 meters, it starts locking onto heads. Probably at a reduced crit ratio. Is this overkill? Maybe. Could you accomplish this by increasing the falloff? Absolutely. But which one do you think is going to be better at making people play closer? Seeing the enemy's health bar drain a little faster, or hearing this? God damn, that's addictive. Hey, and speaking of addiction, only 900 subs away from our goal. Alcohol for me and steak for Sterling. Jingle jingle, look at the keys. What's the problem with the Wolverine? Logan, like many other characters, really only has one thing he does. 90% of the time, you're either setting up a kidnap, kidnapping, or dying after you miss the tackle. This leads to Wolverine either feeling really strong when his stats are good, or really weak when his stats are bad. I think to fix this, we've got to make it so there's options. And to do that, I want to adjust Wolverine's weakest ability, Undying Animal. First off, I would make Undying Animal grant lifesteal, as forcing Wolverine to actually hit people for his survivability prevents him from just screaming as he runs away. Additionally, I would make the ability take a bit longer and be louder. Kind of a weird change, but hear me out. I want there to be 3 main scenarios that play out with this. Option A, scream before going in. This lets you have your lifesteal through the tackle, but you announce your position, giving up the element of surprise. Option B, you tackle, then scream after, keeping the element of surprise, but losing the bit of damage you get when the enemy is knocked down after the tackle. And option C, not screaming at all, where you get the surprise and the damage, but no sustain. Hopefully, this would serve to give Wolverine a bit more variety in the way he engages in fights. What's the problem with... Is he asleep? Whatever. Bucky's a bit tough for me to cover because honestly, I don't think there are any huge design issues with this kit. It's mostly balanced. His kit's pretty well put together, so fixing Bucky's basically just a math problem. I think of all things, his threat level at range is what makes the most sense to nerf. Reel in his fall off and make both starting and fully charging his hook take a bit longer to tone back how scary he is past 15 meters. I would also make the slow and tainted voltage have fall off to encourage you to use it up close to keep people locked down instead of poking with it. Moving away from raw nerfs, I think his ult can use some love, as it's kind of lost a lot of its sauce, but we also need to be careful not to make it too overtuned. I would cut the damage a bit and give the impact a sweet spot in the middle that does bonus damage and increases the execute threshold to encourage you to actually use your brain, along with making it less good at cleaving large groups. I would also decrease the time his culling lasts. It's supposed to be an execute, so it's never made much sense to me that he can have so much time to finish you off after. Maybe I'm just thinking about it too much like Pike ult though. I don't know. What's the problem with the Punisher? I really like Castle's kit. He's already the perfect Call of Duty guy, so I wouldn't change a lot with his design, meaning we've got another math problem on our hands, which for those of you who didn't understand, means it's a balancing issue. I do not think that Bucky is balanced. I repeat, I do not... Sorry about that. Anyways, like I said, the Punisher's simple by design, so it's mostly just balance changes for today. First off, no more one-shot headshots with Deliverance, it's just too much. I'll round up his fire rate to compensate some for the DPS loss though. Next, I think his turret having this much health really only makes it difficult to deal with in low ranks. High rank coordinated players focus it down anyway, so a health nerf should serve to make it a bit easier to deal with when your team's been lobotomized. And a deploy time reduction should hopefully make up for that health loss in higher rank games by letting him start getting value faster. Lastly, I think his ult lets him control a bit too big of an area, so I would decrease his speed during the ult and force him to wind up his gun for half a second before he can start shooting. Basically just make it work like the Heavy's minigun. This should hopefully force him to think a bit more about the positioning of his ult, as he can't reposition or surprise people nearly as easily. What's the problem with Iron Fist? Lynn's got a bit of an identity crisis going on. The devs have been trying to push him as a tank buster, but I don't think very many people like him like that. On the other hand, I don't think we can have Season 0 Iron Fist back in full force. It's just way too easy for him to get his win condition and blow up your backline, so I think he needs to work a bit more for it. I would reduce Dragon Defense's cooldown to make it so not blocking anything reduces the amount of time you get in Yachi Chung Kyun, making it so you're more punished for blocking it. Now, Iron Fist still doesn't have an identity, but I think there's one that people have kind of forgotten, and that's being strong against flyers. This part of his kit kind of fell to the wayside when he was changed to be a tank buster, and I want it back. So I would increase his damage to airborne targets by 20% and do this to his base damage. If you do the math, it works out to him having his current damage against grounded squishies and his old damage against people in the air. I don't want him to just be a counter pick though, so we need to give him a way to launch people up so he can be effective against everyone. I think making the second hit of Kunlun Kick pop you up is the best way to accomplish this. Although if it's supposed to be a starter, I don't think it makes much sense for it to have missing health damage. Ideally, this would let him be strong against everyone, even if they normally stay grounded. What's the problem with Namor? Wait, doesn't that kind of date the video? Whatever. Building characters have a tendency to be a little bit, how you say, mindless. Anyone who's played 2016 Overwatch remembers Torbjorn's lifeless body getting play of the game. But I think Namor manages to avoid this fate quite nicely by taking the Heimerdinger route and making most of his summon's value come from his own actions. I want to push this further by slightly decreasing Spawn's normal damage while increasing their enhanced damage, rewarding Namors who can hit their shots. Next, Blessing of the Deep is just a little bit underwhelming as a safety tool, so I want to trade off some of its raw power for a bit more movement finesse. I'd reduce the maximum duration, but make it so you have a bit more of an arc as it travels. If any of you have ever played Risk of Rain 2, think of it like Void Fiend's utility. This should hopefully let Namor use his head a little bit more when he's caught out instead of just being invincible for 3 seconds straight. Lastly, I think Namor's ability to instantly put down a massive area of Earthbound with no telegraph whatsoever is a bit obnoxious. I would make it so the circle takes a quarter second longer to come out so you can hear the horn to be able to anticipate when, but not where, the circle is going to appear, creating more counterplay and potentially some mind games. Have a happy Halloween! Woo! What's the problem with Iron Man? Nothing. He's perfect. I think of all characters in the game, Iron Man's kit is one of the absolute best. There's almost nothing for me to complain about. Granted, that's partially because he's really simple, but shut up, it's my video, I can say what I want. Tying most of his damage to a close range attack to balance out his ability to fly, giving him strong traversal balanced by an inability to attack, just the way that he feels, it's so good, man. All of his abilities are so... Wait, what's this? Micro... missile? Huh, I guess they gave him a new ability considering I've never seen anyone use this thing before. At this point, I just let him fire him off whenever. It really doesn't make sense for them to be locked to flight and armor when they're already so underwhelming. And you know what? There is one very specific scenario where Iron Man kind of sucks to play, and that's mirror matchups. When two Iron Men are fighting, it's basically just a game of who has armor up off cooldown, which is really obnoxious. I'd fix this by making it so you move a little slower during armored up Unibeam, just so that the underdog has something to take advantage of. Also, I was a bit busy jump scaring you yesterday, but we're only 500 subscribers away from our goal. 10 days left. Can you make it? Most likely, yeah. What's the problem with Psylocke? I'll be real, I am not much of a Psylocke player, but I have played against Psylocke, and I have an alright understanding of what her general gameplay loop is, poking people down from behind and cleaning up unfinished kills. Now, I may be wrong in saying this, but I don't think either of those jobs require her to have a pocket 100 bonus health. I'd either slightly reduce her bonus shield, or reduce it moderately to give her a boost to her base health. Either or work depending on what rank you think she performs too strong in. Speaking of things that have varying strength between ranks, Psylocke's ultimate is a big one. I think the difference maker here is the coordination between your team. Psylocke's ult has massive diminishing returns based on the number of people standing in the circle, so coordinated players can choose to all stay together. Your average plat game, however, is not nearly as likely to have that level of teamwork, so we have to make it a bit less punishing to be alone. I'd reduce the base damage, but make it so for each person in the circle, it gains bonus damage, letting her do more damage to large groups and less to isolated targets. Now, this is a breakpoint change for one-shotting squishies, so I'd shorten the startup to compensate, along with increasing the cost so she's less encouraged to farm ults constantly. What's the problem with Moon Knight? I was having a lot of trouble thinking of something to change for Mark. I can look at him and see that there are issues, but I just couldn't place my finger on it until I remembered way back to when I first came up with concept for this series all the way back in season 1. Good lord, I procrastinated. Anyways, Moon Knight was the first character I ever wrote anything down for, so let's see how good I was back then. Incentivize shooting people instead of onks. This was probably getting on the fact that I think being rewarded extra for hitting the people inside the radius of your onks instead of mindlessly shooting keyholes is probably healthier. Good skill expression and whatnot. I guess I would decrease the bounce penalty against people when they're inside the range of the Onk, but increase the bounce penalty of the Onk itself. And ult moon gravity acceleration. What? Oh, I remember this one. This was back when Moon Knight ult was like instant and bugged or something. So Moon Knight would ult, then immediately die so the voice line wouldn't play and you couldn't react to the damage. I think my point with this was to make it so the fire rate of the talons increases as the ult goes on, punishing you more if you continue to stand in the death circle. What's the problem with Hawkeye? Look, the one-shot's gotta go. I know it's disappointing for the Clint fans, but it's not healthy for the game. Just make the arrow have a flat 45 damage and make charge time only affect projectile speed. I think with that out of his kit, we can start to give him a lot more meaningful buffs, as the rest of his abilities kind of had to suck to balance out the strength of his arrows. First off, I'd massively reduce the startup of his ult. It's kind of dumb that it takes him so long in the first place. I'd also make it so past 40 meters, focus builds at a reduced rate instead of nothing. And lastly, blast arrows. Where to begin? I know I clowned on micro missiles before, but at least those can do something. These are actually useless, and while you could definitely fix it with balance, I think I'd do something a bit more drastic. You know that one scene in the first Avengers movie where Loki catches the arrow and it has a delayed explosion? What if it worked like that, sticking into whatever you hit and then waiting a second or two to detonate? That way you could potentially stack it with a headshot for an insta-kill, but it's telegraphed to the enemy that they're about to get blown up. What's the problem with Daredevil? Daredevil is pretty obviously strong, but I don't think his damage is the issue. It's more everything surrounding it. I think for a bruiser type character, he does his combos way too fast, so I'd increase the end lag on both of the Infernal Fury abilities to make his combos a bit more reactable. His combos are pretty bad, but the real issue with him is that he has so many tools to get into your backline and onto your supports. You could nerf Sonic Pursuit or Devil's Lash, and you probably should. I mean, at the very least, I'd cut the range back a bit, but more importantly, remove his wall climb. I know it's drastic, but Daredevil doesn't need to be able to take so many different flank routes, and his ability to hang off walls to wait so he can drop down to one-shot squishies is far too powerful. Considering he already knows where you are, the challenge for him should be figuring out how to get to you while preserving his resources. What's the problem with Magik? Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue. I know there's something messed up with this character. A 58% win rate across all ranks doesn't just happen, especially considering her pick rate. I know win rate isn't the end all be all of a strong character, but like, 58%, man. That's an 8% edge. Vegas was built on a quarter of that. But like, I got no idea why. I know she has her one-shots, and yeah, considering how strong the rest of her kit is, I'd probably slow these down a bit at the very least, but I feel like there's something more. The Magik mains will try to say I'm crazy, but I know I'm right, somehow. I guess if anything, it's a little dumb that Magik gets to be unstoppable this soon after using Stepping Disc. I can see you're right there, man. You're not fooling anyone. Just make it so she actually has to be gone for her to have immunity, and remove the hit noise you get when hitting her during her invincibility. Actually, you know what? Doesn't it make way more sense for her to be untargetable instead of invincible, considering she's just not there anymore? Yeah, I'll do that, I guess. Probably. What's the problem with Phoenix? Jean's main issue is that she was released in Season 3 while Hela's been in the game since the alpha. I think she's a bit too much overlap with the Asgardian, so the best course of action to differentiate the two should be to increase her off-angle taking capabilities at the cost of her long-range damage. I'd increase Cosmic Flames' fall-off to keep her closer, and give Dark Ascent a small initial burst of height when casted to make it a bit less costly when used to get up onto high ground. And you. End Song Inferno. I think this is such a dumb ability, purely because of this one stat. Fully and entirely wiping out all shields and buildings is terrible design. It causes ult stalemates between Hela and Phoenix, it makes Phoenix unnecessarily strong against a very specific group of heroes. Hell, most building characters can just self-destroy their buildings to negate the effect. I'd cut it down to just halving, at best, then decrease the startup so you're less vulnerable to getting immediately shot out of the sky. God, I hate this thing. What's the problem with Storm? Storm has both a really high win rate and a really low pick rate, which is usually indicative of a character being very deeply mained by a small group of people with very few others playing her. I think this is because she's kind of boring, so we should try to make her feel more engaging. First off, I want to make the decision of which form you're in matter a bit more, so I'd increase the movement boost of Wind mode and the damage boost of Storm mode, but reduce her base damage to equalize the numbers, essentially making Tornado form faster but less powerful. These changes would also carry over to her boosted state as well. I think Bolt Rush is really slow, like unreasonably so I'd let you release it earlier but have the range scale up with charge time. Lastly, I think her ult is kinda strong. Not game breaking, just a little too heavy. I'd have her overhealth start to decay during the hurricane but have the decay speed be half as fast. This would let the bonus health stay for a similar duration, but you don't get as much of it once you exit the ult, making her more vulnerable once the storm clears up. What's the problem with Mr. Fantastic? So, we finally made it. 41 heroes down, 1 left to go. I love Mr. Fantastic. I think his design is amazing, but it's got a lot of problems. Most, if not all, revolving around elastic strength. For a character defined by his flexibility, it's kind of insane how few options he really has once he hits 100. People often suggest letting him use abilities in this state, and honestly, I'd love it. But it just feels like a bit too much of an ask compared to what I've suggested for everyone else. So I'll try my best to do without it, but know that if I could, I would. Anyways, I've got a lot to say, so I'll just rapid fire everything unrelated to his big mode first. Reduce the time the end animation of Reflexive Rubber takes, along with removing the invincibility in favor of giving him his movement speed back immediately. Make it so when you ult, you get the bonus health sooner, along with shortening the time you spend in the impact frame. And please, give any reason to slam people together over just pulling. Anyway, big mode. The other main issue with this thing is that it's just not worth it to stay big a lot of the time. I think a large part of this is the fact that your 350 bonus health isn't offset by the massive hitbox increase. So I'd cut back some of the bonus health to give big mode a bit of damage resistance. I also think you need to be able to change forms faster, so reduce the animation time for going up and down. And with that, I'm finally at peace. And there we have it, the end of the initial run of What's the Problem With, at least in my eyes. Technically there's the team-ups and we still have to do Gambit, but this is where it initially ended. It's still so weird being where I am today. It feels like just a few days ago I was posting videos into the void, lucky to get a single comment. And that's because, yeah, it was. The growth both me and my channel have gone through in such a short span of time is staggering. The fact that I can see myself get closer and closer to goals that just 2 months ago seemed completely unattainable is insane. So,
Thank you. You helped me get this ball rolling, and I've got no plans on stopping. Have a happy Rivals Day, and here's hoping we get many, many more together. What's the problem with Gambit? Finally, took me long enough. It's hard to come up with anything for a character so well designed. Gambit is fun, he's aggressive, a playmaker. He's all about how you choose to use your resources. But moving to this perspective, it's kind of hard to tell what exactly he's doing, which is extremely important for knowing what his options are. Away from League of Legends has a similar gimmick of combination inputs for his spells, and look at how vibrantly different those colors are. To bring Gambit up to the same standard, I would make his heart abilities a brighter red and his spade ones a darker blue, with gold accents whenever he flushes. Moving on to his ultimate, this thing does way too much. It's fun to use, and I don't want to change that, but I don't think it needs quite as much defensive utility. So I would remove the healing over time and cleanse, while changing the burst heal to overhealth so you can't use your ult as a get out of jail free card when you mismanage your resources.